Meet the kitten, Whiskers, a playful stray rescued by marine biologist Dr. Emily Carter. Emily is studying an unusual deep-sea parasitic shark species with regenerative properties. While on a boat expedition, a mutated shark bites Whiskers. The bite wound glows strangely. Whiskers starts exhibiting aggressive behavior. Emily notices biological changes: sharp teeth, gills, webbed paws. Strange telepathic whispers from the ocean haunt Emily. Whiskers escapes into the sea, developing shark-like abilities. A mysterious scientist, Dr. Harold Vex, reveals the mutagenic parasite within Whiskers. Whiskers is now part of a horrific deep-sea ecosystem where he becomes a host. Emily and Vex dive into the abyssal trench to retrieve Whiskers. They find a parasitic colony, sharks infected with grotesque mutations. Emily tries to save Whiskers, but the parasite has fully merged with him. The infection spreads to the research team. In the final scene, Emily looks in the mirror and sees gills forming on her neck. The waves crashed against the rocky shore as Dr. Emily Carter zipped up her wetsuit, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She had spent years studying deep-sea parasites, creatures that lurked in the abyss, latching onto sharks and warping their biology in terrifying ways. But tonight she wasn't thinking about parasites or research. She was thinking about Whiskers. The tiny gray kitten had wandered into her marine lab one stormy evening, soaked and shivering. With piercing blue eyes and a soft, pitiful meow, Whiskers had won her over immediately. "You're staying with me now," Emily had whispered, wrapping the kitten in a towel. For weeks, Whiskers had been her constant companion, curling up in the crook of her arm as she pored over data. Even out here, on a research vessel floating over the deepest part of the ocean, he was never far away. But tonight, something would change forever. Emily's research focused on a new species of deep-sea parasitic shark, a creature that defied biological norms. Unlike regular parasites, this one bonded with its host, mutating it, turning it into something else. Tonight, she and her crew had finally caught one. The shark lay on the deck, writhing, its flesh shifting unnaturally. Its eyes were wrong, not the cold black of an ordinary shark, but glowing silver, like twin moons. "What the hell is this thing?" her assistant David whispered. Emily knelt beside it, running a gloved hand over its rough skin. The parasite embedded in its flesh pulsed, its tendril sinking deeper into muscle and bone. Then, Whiskers pounced onto the deck. "No! Get him out of here!" Emily shouted, but it was too late. The shark lurched violently, its jaws snapping, and bit down on Whiskers' tiny paw. The kitten let out a blood-curdling shriek. Emily yanked him away, cradling him as the wound on his paw glowed, veins turning black and pulsing like ink spreading through water. Then the shark stopped moving, its silver eyes dimming. The parasite had found a new host. Back in her cabin, Emily cleaned Whiskers' wound. But something was wrong. His pupils had become slits, like a reptile's. His whiskers twitched erratically. When he hissed, his teeth had grown too sharp. By morning, Whiskers refused food. He crouched in a corner, his fur rippling, as if something moved beneath his skin. Then he started breathing underwater. Emily found him sitting in the sink, submerged, bubbles escaping from his tiny mouth. He stared at her, unblinking, too still for a cat. A knock at her door made her jump. It was Dr. Harold Vex, a geneticist specializing in parasitic organisms. "I need to see the kitten," he said. Emily hesitated. "How did you—" "I know what bit him," Vex interrupted. His expression was grave. "And I know what happens next." That night, the screaming began. Emily jolted awake to the sound of wet, gurgling cries. She grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the deck. The crew was missing, Blood slicked the floor. Deep, jagged claw marks, too big for a cat, carved through the metal walls. Then she saw Whiskers, or what was left of him. His body had stretched, his limbs elongated and webbed. His fur had receded, replaced by smooth, grayish skin. His tiny mouth had split open into rows of needle-like teeth, and gill slits flared along his throat. And his eyes... were still the same piercing blue. "Whiskers," Emily whispered. The thing that had once been her kitten lunged. Emily woke up to cold water. She was sinking. The ocean had swallowed her whole, the research vessel now a distant, shadowy blur above. Something moved in the darkness. The colony. Hundreds of them, creatures just like Whiskers, once normal animals, now grotesque hybrids. Their bodies writhed, covered in the same parasitic mutations as the shark. And they had a leader. Whiskers, now 20 feet long, circled her. His gaze was eerily intelligent. He remembered her. A voice echoed in her mind. "Join us." The parasite wasn't just physical. It was psychic. It wanted to spread. Emily felt a sharp sting in her arm. Looking down, she saw the infection creeping into her veins. She opened her mouth to scream, but only bubbles escaped. Days passed. Or weeks. Emily wasn't sure anymore. She was changing. She no longer needed air. Her hands had webbed, her skin had turned cold. She was becoming one of them. And deep in the abyss, surrounded by creatures that were once human, cat, or shark, she realized she no longer cared, because now she was home. A fishing boat drifted under the moonlight. The crew spotted something floating, a woman, barely alive. They pulled her aboard, wrapping her in a blanket. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. Emily opened her eyes. They were glowing silver, and deep below the waves, something watched. Something with piercing blue eyes. Whiskers had never left, and he was still hungry.